Good morning, everyone. My name is Jay Paul Massey Singh, and I'm the CEO at the Brampton Board of Trade. And on behalf of myself and the entire team, welcome to our 2025 Energy and Environment Forum. This forum is part of our larger forum series. We have ones on people development, ones on technology, on emerging sectors of business. And these are events focused on education, open dialogue, and sharing best practices, all with the intention of leading to action. So we appreciate you making the time to be here today. I hope you find it educational, but more importantly, I hope you find it inspiring. There's a number of reasons we typically hold this particular event, the E&E one, and that's to support companies regardless of where they may be on their net zero journey, helping you develop strategies, accessing resources, to provide insights on new technologies, innovation, to update on changes in regulations or regulatory environment standards, such as SDGs, or to discuss how you reconcile the challenge of meeting our energy needs today while also planning for a sustainable tomorrow. And I would say all those reasons still apply for us being here today. But I also think there's something else. We're currently in a trade war where our natural resources and therefore our energy independence is at stake. And we're in the middle of a federal election right now, and one which I would say due to rhetoric has resulted in the issue of climate change and energy being one that no federal leader is really willing to engage in. We had at the Board of Trade, we had all candidate debates that we recorded last week, the 6 ridings across Brampton. And we had a number of candidates representing all parties, willing to talk about all issues. It struck me remarkably that the one issue that no one brought up, particularly at the time that it seemed that this was an issue that was going to be mitigated purely around the issue of carbon tax and energy and climate change, not one single candidate brought that issue up. It's something that all those who aspire to office, at least in this community, seem to be unwilling to talk about. And that was really disappointing to me. For a whole bunch of reasons, regardless, I feel, of where you stand on the issue politically or where you believe the actions need to be taken. There are a lot of answers potentially out there. But choosing not to talk about this issue is not going to progress us any further. And so my takeaway from that set of debates was, first, that initial disappointment that I'm sharing, but more importantly, just reaffirmed to me the important role that those of us who are leaders in the community and those of us who are leaders in business need to take. We still have the ability to shape the dialogue. We still have the ability to set the agenda. And I think events like this are really important to help ensure that we're educated, ensure that we're connected to one another, and ensure that we have the opportunity to have open dialogue regardless of political perspective or regardless of the solution in particular that we're promoting, to have an exchange of ideas in the hopes that we can continue to make sure that these issues remain top of mind and that we're able to take action that is helping us as we go forward. So I appreciate you being here because I think this year in particular, this event has much more importance than it may have had in years past. Our role, I think, as business leaders remains crucial. And in that spirit, I encourage you to engage with one another, to share your ideas, and to think boldly, not just about how you can apply what you may learn today in the context of your business in the short term, but what it may mean for the future of our country as you think about the decisions you're making when you go back to your offices. Now, before we begin the official part of our program, I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered here today within the city of Brampton, and which is in turn within the region of Peel. And this region, the reason we're here together today, is part of the treaty land of the territory of the Mississauga of the Credit. And for thousands of years, Indigenous peoples have inhabited and cared for this land and other regions along this corridor. Specifically, we acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Ojibwa-Chippewa people. And the land is home to the Métis, and most recently the territory of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation, who themselves are descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. There are 2 treaties in the region of Peel, one of which is Treaty 19 between the Crown and the Anishinaabe peoples, and represented as the Adjutant's Purchase, comprising of Brampton and Caledon. We're all bound and responsible for honoring these treaties made in this region and are fortunate to have the opportunity to occupy this land. It's my hope that the conversations we have today will inspire us to take personal action, not just as it pertains to reconciliation that we have as business leaders and leaders in this community, but specifically our obligation to the earth that we inhabit and those who came before us and to those who will come after us. And so with that, I'd like to thank our sponsors who are able to make today happen. First off, Canon Canada, thank you for hosting us in this lovely facility. For those of you, I saw a lot of you taking photographs while you're here. This state-of-the-art facility was designed and built to align with Canon's commitment to sustainability and respect for the environment. Not only is it beautiful, but it's also energy efficient. It's a LEED Gold certified facility featuring LED lighting, motion sensors, solar adaptive shading, and rooftop gray water collection to help Canon Canada save energy. And by implementing not just the building itself, but the programs within, including organic waste diversion, phasing out the use of plastics, filtering watering station, Canon Canada's headquarters spotlights their continuing commitment to waste reduction and increasing the use of renewable energy. So thank you, Canon, for hosting us today, and thank you for your sponsorship. Additionally, I'd like to thank for their support our platinum sponsor, the City of Brampton, our gold sponsor, Electra, our silver sponsors, Dynacare and Clorox Company, and our lunch sponsor, the Food Quotient. We have some great food coming later today. And finally, making sure that you can hear my voice, our AV partner, Livecast. So thank you to our sponsors for helping us be here. A round of applause for them. As you can tell, I'm trying to keep this quick. We've got a lot. Those of you who used to come to Board of Trade events, you know I can go on and on. There's some great speakers today, and I want to make sure we make time for them. A few last housekeeping items. You were emailed yesterday an email confirmation about today that included a QR code to our program for the event. If you didn't receive it or don't have it handy, it's up on the screen there. It'll give you breakdowns of all our speakers, the event program, more information on not just who's appearing on our stages, but how you can connect with them after and connect with their work. So we hope, again, that you'll be inspired today, and we'll continue the conversations after today, and those resources are in your program. As far as our program goes, we're really excited. We have a couple of keynote presentations, including Dr. Jack Mintz, who's going to be talking about sustainability in business sense, and what makes sense, quite frankly, as politics shift around us and policies shift around us. We've got an amazing presentation from the City of Brampton, as they're going to be talking about their Business Climate Partnership Program and the resources that the city has made available to help businesses who are looking to achieve their net zero targets, featuring some folks who went through oh my gosh, I'm losing my term. Pardon me? The pilot. Thank you, Andrea. The pilot version of the program. Thank you so much. Sharing their learnings and their experiences, hoping that'll inspire you. That was 100% the save I was looking for. And then we've got some great panels scattered throughout the day, including those on meeting our energy needs, that on shaping climate policy globally, sustainable actions one can take in your business, featuring some great business case studies and resources that are available to you, and then what's happening in the space of innovation in green tech and clean tech here in our community. Additionally, we're going to have some breaks for you. Hopefully you grab some food already. There'll be lots of breaks scattered throughout the day where you have the opportunity to grab some coffee, make sure your energy stays high. We've got some fantastic vendors shared on the screen there, displaying things in the atrium. Make sure you pay them a visit, learn and get an opportunity to connect with some great people. And then there are, if you'd like to see more of the facility here, facility tours of the Canon headquarters, I believe at around lunchtime, around 12:30. And after the event, you can just gather in the atrium there, and someone from Canon will take you for a tour around the facility. So all that said, like I said, we've got a great program today. And today, as I shared, is about dialogue. We want you to talk, we want you to connect with folks. But the dialogue goes in a few different ways. It's not just between our panels and within the sessions, but we also are trying to create opportunities for dialogue between our partners and those of you who are here in attendance today. And it's an opportunity for us to learn, share, and develop ideas. So with that being the case, I'd like to invite up to the stage for a moment Pam Banks, the Executive Director of the Altitude Accelerator. They're our local RIC, Regional Innovation Center, which focuses on supporting green and clean tech entrepreneurs. Pam and her team are looking to engage with businesses and understand the needs that our corporate community has as it pertains to innovation, and also share some of the work that they're doing. So I'd love to give Pam an opportunity to share how they're doing that, and hope that you'll give her an opportunity to hear from you. Pam?
Thank you, J. Paul. And it's great to see you all here today. I hope that you get a chance to visit our table and some of our team that's going to be here out in the atrium. I'd just like to share a little bit about Altitude Accelerator. Some of you may have heard of us in the past as a Regional Innovation Center, the RIC Center. We rebranded when we moved to the Brampton Innovation District back in 2021. And our goal is really two pieces: to support founders that are commercializing technology, and we do have a specialty in clean tech, and we work with founders around energy, sustainability, water, and of course tracking emissions. So that's one part of what we do. The second part of what we do is really to help those founders connect with industry that are looking for innovative solutions to help improve their environmental goals. So we believe that having strong industry partners is important not only for you that are here, but also the founders that we work with. And as part of our commitment to supporting Brampton, the business community. We are hoping that you will participate with us in doing an industry, energy, and environmental survey. What we're asking everybody to do is to complete a very short survey and just let us know what are the critical issues that you're trying to solve in your company. This will help us inform our founders who are working on solutions so that these solutions are real world, they're solving problems that are scalable and that can be implementable in industry. That survey results will help us inform our founders from a programming perspective, and hopefully policy recommendations and connecting those founders to you as potential suppliers in the future. This survey is designed to help us empower what's happening to local businesses, innovate more effectively, reduce our environmental impact, and remain competitive in this fast-growing economy. Thank you. Okay. So there's the QR code. I think 10 questions, 5 minutes. Your inputs, your insights are valuable and appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Appreciate it. Thank you, Pam. And if you'd like to learn more about what the Altitude Accelerator is doing, Pam and her colleagues do have a table out in the atrium as well to give you an opportunity to hear more about their work, give you an opportunity to interface directly and share your input. And our fourth panel today will be has been coordinated by the Altitude Accelerator and will feature a number of founders who have started their initiatives here in Brampton. For those who are unfamiliar, I know there's a lot of folks here from out of town. Among the things, the initiatives that we have here in Brampton that we're really proud of, driven by our great colleagues at the City of Brampton, has been our Innovation District. And that is a collection of incubators, entrepreneurship centers, and startup resources located in the downtown of Brampton, including our Beehive, which is our landing spot for newcomer entrepreneurs and their next program for recent immigrants to Canada. Excuse me. The Altitude Accelerator, the Brampton Venture Zone, which has a number of programs. Currently, their cohort is focusing on medtech innovation here in the city, the Rogers Cybersecurity Catalyst, and the Brampton Entrepreneurship Center. The Brampton Board of Trade is an affiliate and a partner to these programs as well. And if you'd like to learn more about innovation and what's happening here in Brampton from an entrepreneurship perspective, please let me know. My colleagues from the Economic Development Office are here as well. We'd be happy to help you connect. And I just wanted to share that because I know there's some folks here who aren't from Brampton and want to know some of the cool things that are happening here. Now, with that, I'd like to get to our first keynote and get our program underway. Excuse me. And for that, I'd like to ask Jerry Prodi to the stage to make an introduction for me, please. Jerry is the president of the Collaborative Canadian Energy Solutions, a non-for-profit advocate for energy and environmental policies and regulations, which supports the development of all forms of energy throughout Canada. Furthermore, Jerry is also the board chair at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, one of Canada's leading independent think tanks, nationally focused, based in Ottawa. I share this not just because it's a great credential and that I feel lucky that we have Jerry joining us today, but because it's an opportunity to plug the Macdonald-Laurier Institute's mission, which I love, which is to make poor public policy unacceptable. And as an organization that focuses on advocacy ourselves, I think it's a fantastic byline. So with that, if we could please welcome Jerry to the stage.
Thank you, J. Paul, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, before I introduce Jack, I just want to say congratulations on having the all-candidates debate. Despite the fact they didn't get into environment and energy issues, I really encourage you, and I'm sure you're going to have meetings with those several successful candidates post-election, talk about the priorities of the Brampton area, a critical part of the Canadian economy. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Jack Mintz. J. Paul mentioned Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Jack is probably one of the most distinguished senior fellows at Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And you've all got his bios in your digital program. And I'm not going to repeat what's in there, but all I can tell you is it is actually a very short synopsis of his affiliations and his accomplishments and his work. And you may have read some of Jack's many op-eds and articles in Canadian newspapers, which he regularly provides. But I'm going to tell you something that maybe you don't realize about Jack, And in his career, he's been sought out by governments of all stripes for advice on tax and fiscal policy in areas like healthcare. And federally, he's advised both the Conservative and the Liberal governments. Provincially, he's been involved throughout the country with governments. Conservative governments he's advised in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Liberal governments in British Columbia, New Brunswick, and PEI, and NDP government in Saskatchewan. And here in Ontario, he's advised Liberal, Conservative, and NDP governments. So when you talk about making, if you have poor policy and governments, as they come in and change, they'll look to experts like Jack to say, what do we need to do better and how do we move forward? So with all the issues facing Canada at the present time in Ontario, Jack is in extremely high demand, and I feel that we're very fortunate to be able to hear his comments this morning and look forward to any questions you might have. Jack, welcome to the stage.
I'm not sure you're going to need these notes. I'm just going to see if, make sure I'm connected here properly. Yeah, I pressed it. Oh, there we go. Okay. First of all, it's a real pleasure to be here today. It's been actually quite a while since I've been in Brampton. And of course, this week is another one of those very uncertain times that we're facing. We're now having an election next week, but it's not just the election. It's all the other things that are happening around the world. In fact, I get 7 newspapers in the morning, and I often like to read the international ones because I like to see what's happening outside Canada, not just focused on Canada. And one realizes how much things change. And as J. Paul mentioned about how the whole environmental issues seem to have dropped off the agenda, certainly is sitting on the back burner during this election, I think it reflects the fact that life really changes very quickly and priorities change. And even though we may talk about, let's say, doing something by 2050, that's a very long time from now, 25 years, where all sorts of things can happen during that time. I always like to mention a book that I read called 1913 that was published 2013, just on its 100th anniversary of the year before the start of the First World War. And it was a survey of different cities across the world. In fact, Winnipeg was the one chosen for Canada. And it looked at how people thought during 1913, before the First World War actually started. You can certainly expect that in 1913, nobody thought that there would be 2 major wars and a Great Depression all within 30 years after that point. And it just shows you that what happens between now and 2050 is very uncertain. And right now, we're living in that uncertainty today. So what I want to do is really talk about something which is a bit more long-term-ish, and that is with respect to the use of energy and the environmental issues associated with it. Some of that will not be going away. In my view, the energy transition is on its way. We will see an energy transition of some sort, and we'll move in a certain direction doing that. But I also think that energy is absolutely critical to our standard of living today. And we can't ignore the importance of energy and how critical it is to our daily lives. In fact, a wonderful book written years ago by Ian Morris talked about 3 major factors that cause societies to prosper. And it included energy and the use of energy is one of those major factors. The other 2, of course, innovation, which was associated with actually military necessity. As we know, necessity is the mother of innovation, and military needs is often a major source of what contributes to innovation in society. And the other one was urbanization, which also had a huge impact on growth. But we can't forget how important energy is. And in Canada, we have been blessed by having that energy, huge energy resources that not only we can use, but also society as a whole can use throughout the world. And so in my discussion today, I'm going to really, actually, I'm glad I did make my PowerPoint notes because I can, my reading ability is not that great from this distance. But I'm going to be talking about really 5 points that I want to make. The first is that before Trump tariffs, Canada has already had a poor economic performance and for some time. In fact, as so many people pointed out, including myself, Canada's GDP per capita, once adjusted for inflation, has not increased at all since 2015. And that is a very serious concern. In fact, now our standard of living has not only slipped to about 75% of the US standard of living, but also we have now fallen behind the OECD on average. And I think that's a big concern. In my view, Canada is not broken. In fact, there's a lot of great things about Canada that we can talk about, and I don't believe that that is going to be a long-run situation for the country. It's a matter of management. And in fact, when it comes to the energy environmental file, management is a very serious question, which I'll say a few things later. And in particular, the third point I want to make and emphasize is how important it is to leverage our comparative advantage. And that comparative advantage has been the resource sector, which has been important ever since the beginning of Canada. When we first started off, we traded internationally lumber, we traded mining, but most important, we also traded furs. And later on, of course, that all developed into other things. And of course, we all export other services and other things like any industrialized country today, but resources have been a very significant comparative advantage, and I'll show you why in a moment. And then I'm going to turn a little bit to the election. I wanted to say a few things about the Liberal plan and the Conservative plan. In fact, late last night, I finished my article for Friday's National Post, which is a review of those two plans and the implications of it. But I do want to say a few things, particularly with respect to the environmental agenda, which I agree has really dropped off the table in terms of discussion, but it's not going to go away, and we'll say a few things about that. Now, what I want to begin is saying something about our growth in inequality, and this is a chart actually I prepared for my classes on tax policy, but just to give some idea about where Canada is relative to other G7 countries. And as you can see, our per capita GDP in 2023, this was the latest year available, and it's measured in what's called 2021 international dollars. So it's a basket of currencies. It's not the US dollar, but it's one that's used by the World Bank. Canada has a per capita GDP of about 55,000. And as you can see, we're really no different now than many of the European countries, except for Germany, which is higher than us. But of course, there's a very significant difference from the United States today. I think the bigger concern is with respect to cumulative growth per capita of GDP 2015 and 2013. And as you know, 2024 was actually negative real GDP growth again, which is about the third time it's happened in the past few years. And so actually we virtually have stalled in growth in per capita GDP. This is 2%, but if you add in 2024, it'll be close to zero. France has, as you can see, we've had the pandemic year here. Europeans have not been particularly great in terms of per capita growth. Surprisingly, Italy has been doing well. But as you can see, Europe has not exactly been stunning in their growth either, but certainly better than Canada. And then, of course, the United States has been exceptional at this point. And, of course, that is now rapidly changing this year with the tariffs that I'll say a few things later about it. Where Canada has been successful, of course, has been having less inequality. And so economists measure what's called the Gini coefficient. It's really a way of trying to measure inequality. If the Gini coefficient is close to 0, then you have perfect equality. If it's close to 1, that means all the income is sitting with the highest, richest group in society. And as you can see on just market income, that ignores the role of government in terms of transfers and taxes, et cetera, Canada actually has the lowest, has more equality compared to the other G7 countries. And of course, all the G7 countries, including us, have policies to try to achieve more equality, redistributive policies. And so Canada still is at the bottom compared to the others. But as you can, and we have successfully reduced our inequality as a result of these policies. But as you can see, other countries have done so, and even more so in the case of France than Canada. That's not really the point. The point what I really want to make is that we have had particularly policies in the past number of years that have been geared towards redistribution, but have ignored economic growth. And I think that's one of the reasons why this election, when you look at the platforms of the two major parties, there's hardly any discussion about new redistributive programs. There's a little bit, but not very much. Most of it is focused on economic growth, and I think this chart really tells you why. Now, as we know, capital expenditure has been particularly poor in Canada, and I haven't had a chance to update this chart that we did a couple of years ago for an Australian publication. But I think it tells us, even if you add on 1 or more 2 years, it really won't change the figure very much. But as you can see, Canada is the orange line here, and the private sector investment as a share of GDP has dropped precipitatively since 2014 and is now below 10%. But I think more concerning, it has dropped below other major countries like United States, the OECD countries on average. In fact, we're quite a bit lower now than the OECD on average. But we're even less than Australia, which is another resource-based economy. And I think I put in Norway because it's an interesting example. That's the red line. Norway has actually, their private sector investment as a share of GDP has actually kept up, even though it's heavily dominated by the oil and gas sector. And as we know, Norway has been able to find a sweet spot between environmental policies and energy development. They haven't given up energy development. They haven't given up the oil and gas sector. In fact, they've been developing it. But at the same time, they've had a number of policies to try to reduce emissions. And I think it's that kind of issue that I think is a big challenge for any country, especially resource-based countries today. But it does show you that actually Norway has been able to achieve that, which is quite significant. Now, why is resource development so important? Well, let me quickly go over some points, but I'm going to show you some numbers in a moment. First of all, Canada, its most comparative advantage, as I said, is resources, and it's been a major source of export activity for the country. Whether we're talking about the actual resources being produced, whether it's in agriculture or fishing, forestry, mining, et cetera, or the connected industries where a significant part of their value added is dependent on having resources available to them, such as refining in the case of oil and gas, or in the case of mining, it would be the processing of mining and selling processed mining products like aluminum, or whether it's in agriculture, whether it's not just selling wheat, but also derivatives of the various types of food products, et cetera. All those things are what you might call the resource sector when looking at them as a whole. And in fact, what I'm going to show you in a moment is that without the resource sector, Canada's exchange rate would drop precipitously. We would have, in fact, it's been the major source of a goods surplus. And of course, this is the debate that we're having with the United States, because Trump keeps looking at that surplus of Canada, but it's primarily driven by the resource sector, which has been a reason why we've had an export surplus with the United States and other countries. Now, once we include all these related industries, including the resource sector, we see that 1/6 of Canada's economy is its value added is dependent on the resource sector, and it's also 1/2 of Canada's non-residential investment. So it's not something to ignore. And even with the drop in commodity prices, as I'll show in a moment after 2014, Canada's investment still significantly depends on the resource industries. Also, and this is very important, resource sectors also have the highest labor productivity than any other industry. And labor productivity is typically measured as value added per unit, per hour, per working hour. And in fact, I'll show you some numbers, but if we shut down that resource sector now, we would have a huge drop in our labor productivity. In fact, the real disappointment is how poor labor productivity is in some of our other sectors, like manufacturing, and including the auto trade sector, the auto sector. And I think that's where a lot of work has to be done to improve the productivity in those sectors, and simply shutting down the energy industry is not going to be a way of trying to achieve better productivity for the country as a whole. And of course, that productivity is critical for a number of reasons, including generating tax revenues for governments, as well as wages and salaries and incomes for Canadians. And as I'm going to show also, it's quite surprisingly, despite all the rhetoric and the various studies that some people have shown, which I can go into depth about why their analysis is incorrect, is that actually the most highly taxed sector in the economy is oil and gas in terms of their investment compared to all other sectors. But in fact, the least taxed is mining, which I'll explain later on, just below manufacturing, by the way, which kind of tells you something about the fact that taxation has been used as a way of trying to get more money from the richest sectors in order to help the Canadian fiscal needs that governments have in general. Now, let me begin first with Canada's top exports and the labor productivity numbers. So in crude oil and natural gas extraction, labor productivity is $356 per working hour, which is actually quite high. And as you can see, refined petroleum is $840 per working hour. That's immense. Those are extremely high numbers. And it's not surprising that the sectors with the highest labor productivity per working hour also tend to have the highest wages per working hour. And that has been true for many years. When you look at this list, you can see that it is very dominated by the resource sector. In fact, the only other sector that is major in terms of production is manufacturing, particularly motor vehicles and parts, which have as you can see, auto parts is only $60 per working hour in terms of labor productivity. Motor vehicles at $85. This is based on the latest year, 2023 numbers, and pharmaceuticals at $108. But as you can see, generally, when you look at the actual export values, motor vehicles and parts is a very important export item for Canada. They're roughly about 12% of our exports. But when you put together crude oil and refined petroleum, those two alone account for 20% of our exports. And you can see that also crops, gold, lumber, aluminum, iron ore, fishing, those are the top export items we have. And so when you aggregate these things up, this little chart tells you, I hope it's clear enough for you, is that when you look at the trade balances of Canada, if you take out energy and all natural resources, we basically are just, what we export is just equal to what we import. Add in energy and then add in the rest of natural resources into the mix, they account for roughly $60 billion of our exports to the rest of the world as of 2022. So, and that number has stayed similar to today. The main point is that the resource sector is one of the reasons we have been able to have a higher currency, value of the currency. Now, some people might say, oh, that's a bad thing, having a high currency. But no, actually, it's the opposite. When you have a high currency, you're a rich country. Your salaries are higher, and bringing in imports are a lot cheaper as a result. It's countries that are doing poorly tend to have weak currencies and depreciating currencies. And that is something that we have to worry about because, of course, our currency has gone up and down over the years. It's been at parity, if you remember, before 2014, from the period I think roughly 10 years during that period. It was also a parity back in the 1950s. That was partly as a result of the resource boom in prices. But then when we don't have that resource boom, our currency drops. And currently it's around 70 cents US. It's a little bit more lately at 72. But that's been a number that we had even back in the 1990s. And that created tremendous pressure, including brain drains, as people had better opportunities to move abroad, et cetera. So it's very important that that energy sector be continued. Otherwise, we could have very significant issues involved with a very low dollar and the pressures that that brings to a country like that. And of course, we know that countries that really suffer, like Argentina, when they have bad fiscal management, can actually suffer the consequences of a depreciating dollar and then require money from the International Monetary Fund in order to prop up their currency. Now, natural resources are also a very important part of our GDP, as I mentioned earlier on. It's around close to 15% of our GDP. And in the case of energy, it's about 6 to 7% of our GDP today. But you can see that that's been fairly constant over the years. It's kind of tracked down recently, mainly due to lower oil prices and lower commodity prices. But generally, it's a fairly significant part of the economy. In fact, it's actually larger than the auto sector, which tends to be a smaller number as well. Now, as I mentioned, natural resources are a very significant part of our business capital expenditure. This is non-residential tangible assets. And again, you can see that the natural resource sector accounts for roughly about 40% of our total private sector investment in Canada. And even it did hit as high as 55% during the commodity boom period before 2015, and has tracked down, but it's still fairly large despite the changes that have occurred. And of course, it's been rising recently in importance. Energy is also tracking the same, and it's about half of that private sector investment, maybe a bit less. And as I promised you, when it comes to taxation, now, I do a lot of work on taxation on capital, and we have a model that's based on data that we get from the Department of Finance, but we estimate what do we call the effective tax rate on new investment, which takes into account not only the corporate income tax, the statutory rates, and the tax bases, and the complexities associated with that, but also when we compare across countries and with Canada, we include sales taxes and capital inputs, transfer taxes, of which real estate transfer taxes are actually quite numerous in various countries and quite significant, as well as in the case of the mining and oil and gas sector, we include resource taxes that could have an impact on investment decisions as well. And as you can see in this table, the aggregate effective tax rate on all capital, excluding the resource sector, is about 17%. In the case of Canada oil and gas, it's 26%, which is higher than any other sector in the economy. Non-critical mining, that's where you don't get special incentives for compared to the critical mining, which is critical mining including things like copper and zinc and nickel, et cetera. Non-critical mining, the effective tax rate is about 11%, and for critical mining, it's 8.6%. Which you can see is even lower than manufacturing, which tends to get a lot of tax incentives as well in the Canadian system. In fact, one of the things we've remarked on, we compare 95 countries, by the way, and we show that that manufacturing, the difference between manufacturing and non-manufacturing and service sectors in Canada, that difference is quite wide compared to most countries. In other words, we provide a very favorable tax system towards manufacturing in Canada compared to other sectors. Well, if you look at other countries, including the other G7 countries, that difference is very small. This has been something we've been doing for years, and yet mining employment has been dropping quite a bit as a share of GDP in Canada, as well as value added has dropped as a share of GDP, which kind of makes you wonder, you know, taxation, of course, I always argue is important, but it's not the only factor that affects business decision making, and that should always be remembered as well. Now, that kind of gives you a bit of a picture about the importance of the resource sector, and I think that might explain the reason why we've had such a difference in today's election, where issues like climate change has dropped off the agenda. And I think part of it is because both the Liberals and Conservatives have denunciated the carbon tax, and even though the Carney plan would include a federal tax on the large emitters, but actually most of those taxes are at the provincial level and run by the provinces. They're not run by the federal government. It's only Manitoba and PEI that uses a federal tax on large emitters. The rest of the provinces have their own systems, which kind of, so if the federal government's going to abolish that, they can't abolish what the provinces do. And that's why I think the provincial big emitter taxes are going to remain for many years. I don't see Ontario getting rid of theirs. I don't see Alberta doing it. I think those systems will continue. And those are going to be decisions made by the provinces who are interested in climate change. But and because of the fact that that has become less important, has been largely driven by the issue around Trump tariffs, and I could have say more about that, which I won't today. But I think it reflects the fact that people are now concerned about Canada's future, given the huge push on the U.S. by the U.S. to shift manufacturing back to their heartland, as well as using tariffs as a revenue source, as well as using tariffs to correct for policies that they accuse other governments of subsidizing their exports to the United States to the detriment of the U.S. Those are the arguments that are given for that. Those tariffs, of course, are a concern because they do reduce GDP. The IMF just came out with a report this week that have downgraded Canada's growth by 0.6 percentage points for this year and 0.4 for the year after, if I recall the number. But the main point is that there's a huge amount of uncertainty, and even with existing tariffs, we don't know if there's going to be more coming on or whether there'll be a reduction. But my view is that those tariffs are going to be around for a while, and they're not going to disappear in 2 years or in 4 years. We are in a very different world today, and it's going to be something that we're going to have to live with. So obviously, how governments respond to that is going to be very important. So I thought I would put together a little comparison between the Liberal plan and the Conservative plan, which has really been very focused more on the fiscal issues. There's all sorts of policies that are recommended. But I would say that the major differences between the two is really a philosophical difference. The Liberal plan is based on the idea that the best way to generate growth is through government intervention in the economy by supporting, for example, business investment through grants and tax credits and subsidies, et cetera. While the Conservative plan is based on the idea of removing obstacles to private sector investment through deregulation, tax reductions, et cetera. And I think those are two very different philosophies, which I think Canadians have to make up their mind which they think is a better approach to achieve these things. So for example, what we see in both parties is a very different approach to deficits. The Liberal plan would run, and by the way, this is based on a relatively robust growth in GDP. They assume, and as well as the Conservatives, they take a baseline used by the Parliamentary Budget Office of roughly about 4% growth per year, nominal growth per year, which includes inflation. A little bit less than what we saw in the before the pandemic, but it is a basic assumption that they use, that there is going to be growth, which of course is not a very, I would say, a pretty optimistic view of the world, because because already people are marking down growth, as I mentioned, like the IMF, and I think if one was going to be prudent, you'd be using a lot less growth assumptions in your plan to see how much we can really tolerate in terms of higher debt and higher deficits. So the Liberal plan, of course, has would have about $225 billion of new deficits over the year, with a rise in the debt-GDP ratio of about 6.8%. The Conservative plan has about $100 billion of deficits, which would cause the debt-GDP ratio to rise somewhat. Actually, I put 3 points, but I think it's a little less than that. Then the spending would be much bigger under the Liberal plan at about $200 billion over 4 years, including $4.5 billion in additional interest expense. Well, in the case of the Conservative plan, it's a reduction in spending of about $14 billion, not very large relative to $450 billion of total government spending in today in federal spending. And it'd be, but there would be a $2.5 billion saving in interest expense. Tax cuts, once you add in the tariffs, which are going to be paid by Canadians because of the way that the world operates. We're a small country, and our tariffs will be eaten by us in terms of higher prices. So once you take that and the carbon tariff, which is in the Liberal plan, that will be, the net tax cut is about $29 billion, and for the Conservatives, it's about $22 billion, again net of tariffs, and some other revenue increases that they have. So not that large on the tax cut side as one might think. Deregulation, though, is a very significant part of the Conservative plan, which they attribute would increase GDP by several points. That would lead to about $30 billion in more revenues. But the big issue is the fiscal anchor, which is weak on both parties. The Liberals do mention a declining debt-GDP ratio, but they're actually letting the debt-GDP ratio rise. In the case of the Conservatives, they do have a fiscal anchor that they want to introduce, where any new dollar of new spending would be matched by $1 of reduction in other in savings. And this was a policy, actually one-for-one policy, that was used by the Clinton regime in the 1990s in order to try to reduce the amount of public spending. And because governments often don't have any constraints, don't have the sense of scarcity, but when you have a rule like this, you're putting in scarcity. You're saying you want to spend more here, you got to give up some resources elsewhere. As we know in business, that's something that always has to be done. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background, but if you notice on the climate change stuff, the differences between the two parties are quite dramatic. In the case of the Conservatives, they would try to encourage a lot of energy development, LNG growth, on the argument that would reduce worldwide emissions, even though it would increase Canadian emissions. But of course, worldwide emissions is really what's most important. The Liberal plan would have a continuation of various regulations, like the cap on oil and gas emissions, the electricity emissions, et cetera, and all those actually do impede economic growth. And of course, I think we have a very clear difference in approaches by the two parties with respect to their climate policies. And that, actually, I should have moved this, and that, I think, sorry, Let me go back. And so this, I provide you a list of the differences in the resource environment policies. Basically, the Conservative plan is based on kind of like the Biden type of approach of subsidizing new technologies, but eliminating many regulations that impede development. They want to build national corridors. The Liberals also talk about that. And there is some discussion about non-climate change environmental issues in the Conservative plan, particularly about reducing sewage in waterways and marine protected areas. In the case of the Liberal plan, they also like national corridors, but the focus is more on electricity. They would continue the Impact Assessment Act, which has been a problem not just for oil and gas, but for mining because of the regulatory system. But the Liberals would like to try to make some improvements with respect to having one-stop regulation. And they would continue subsidies for things like carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So you can see there are some very important differences between the two parties, but none of that has really come out in this election as a major issue, which is a bit surprising because this is very much a wedge issue between the two parties. So let me just conclude with really 4 quick points. First of all, in my view, given our current economic record over the past 10 years and the lost decade that we faced, I don't believe marginal reforms are going to work. Small changes like cutting personal tax rates by a point or two or cutting the corporate rate by a point or two is going to work very well. I think if we're going to really really energize the Canadian economy, actually that's a great word, energize, but anyway, but if we're going to really energize the Canadian economy, what we need actually are some dramatic reforms. The kinds of things that would really wake up, I think, the private sector and to encourage not only people here to invest more and to try to export more, but also draw businesses from elsewhere to the Canadian economy, which of course will mean having a relatively robust trading platform, which will likely mean, despite everything that's happening with Trump, who's there for 4 years, but will likely mean that at some point we will need a deal with the United States in order to make sure that we have access to that market. I believe that actually a big bang in reforms will address a lot of problems today. And I often talk about Ireland as one of my favorite examples because this was the poor cousin of Europe for centuries that turned itself into now the country with the highest per capita GDP in Europe today. One time they lost people to the rest of the world, particularly Europe and North America, and today now they have people coming into Ireland. In fact, they now talk about the problems of immigration, which would have been unheard of years ago. And they've also been able to educate their people. They only had secondary education. Now they have gotten their tertiary education at very high levels because the Irish government pushed that, including giving free tuition at the university level for many years. But it was a combination of policies, but most important one actually that helped draw a lot of demand for labor in Ireland, not just improve the supply of labor, but was the corporate tax cut to 12.5%, which was so unique compared to any other country at that time that was having 30%, 35% corporate tax rates. The point is it was a very unique policy. It was a big bang policy that had a very dramatic impact on Ireland. And I think that's the kind of thinking that we need today. Being the same as everybody else is not going to work. We need to do something distinctive, I think, to grow the economy. And that's why I think often tax reforms, regulatory reforms, really have much more of a big bang impact than some other things. And lately, I've been working on some various ideas, including simplified and flatter personal income tax with lower rates, and also a corporate tax exemption for reinvested profits, which is something that's been adopted in some countries, but it has really driven a lot of capital to their country. So instead of having accelerated depreciation, investment tax credits, and all these other things, instead just have a zero tax on profits that are reinvested in assets in Canada. And that, I think, could have a very significant impact on growth for the Canadian economy. Those are all just various ideas, but I think the main point, coming back, is that if we want to achieve the energy transition and have success, we're going to need investment. And I think we need a policy, a set of policies that are going to really encourage that investment that we haven't seen before. And so at that point, I think I'll stop, and thank you very much for listening.
Appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you, Jack. Appreciate your insights on a number of topics, but most specifically, how much of a driver the natural resource and energy sectors are to our economy and how its growth, not just to the benefit of those in those sectors, but really to all Canadians, whether you're talking about the valuation of the Canadian dollar, the strength of the economy, the creation of jobs broadly, wages, et cetera. And it's wonderful to have that unpacked and really understand the granularity of that. But most importantly, what I really appreciate in the context of today's conversation, you drilling it down to the policy levers that may be available to us as Canadians to support that growth and influence the priorities that those who are elected may take on. And in particular, at a time, as we shared earlier, that many of our, those who are seeking office and our elected officials are afraid to talk about these issues, I'm glad you're giving us the insights to take action on these issues. And then finally, as a segue to today as a whole, I love that you ended it on the encouragement to think bold. And whether that be in the form of thinking globally, reform, however have it, I appreciate that you left us with that thought to think big in terms of what we're going to do next, because I think it's a great setup for the rest of the conversations today. So thank you once again, Jack. Appreciate your time. I'd also love to point out you used a line that I use often too, because about 87% of my job lately seems to be talking about tariffs, and it's I have a lot more to say about that, but I won't. Which I feel at this point is now the official motto or slogan of Canadians talking about Trump tariffs. So I appreciate someone as esteemed as you uses the same line. I've got a lot more to say, but this isn't the time for it. Now, with that, we've got a little bit of a break for you folks, an opportunity to refresh your coffees, do some networking, talk about what it is that Jack shared with us, and we'll be coming back at, let's say, about 10:35 to start the next set of presentations. The next one up is the City of Brampton's climate change program for businesses. All right, thank you very much. We'll see you back in a few minutes.